He's just a hungry nobody, Juliana's mother said, her voice sharp beneath the glint of her wine glass. My daughter deserves better. Silverware stilled. Glasses hovered mid-air. Someone cleared their throat, but no one spoke. I turned my head slowly, just enough to watch Noel freeze beside me. His smile vanished like steam on glass. His knuckles tightened under the white linen tablecloth. Juliana didn't speak. She didn't touch his hand, didn't object, didn't even blink. Elaine Marchand leaned back, pleased with the silence she had carved into the room. She didn't look at me, and that was her first mistake. I folded my napkin gently and set it on my plate. Not out of anger, out of finality. Noel looked at me, eyes asking a question he wasn't sure how to phrase. His voice was stuck somewhere between pride and shame. He wanted to leave but didn't want to be the one to walk first. I nodded once. That was all he needed. We stood together. No chairs scraped. No voices followed. I let my fingers brush lightly across his shoulder as we passed behind Elaine. Juliana called his name softly, like it still held value. He didn't turn. Outside, the air bit at our coats. We walked 2 blocks before either of us spoke. You didn't have to leave with me, he murmured. I wasn't going to stay without you, I said. His shoulders slumped. I should have said something. I stopped. You will, when it matters. He looked at me again, like he was trying to recalibrate who I was, what I was made of. I didn't give him the answer. I let him wonder. I've been mistaken for a lot of things. The receptionist, the assistant. Once at a conference, I hosted someone asked if I was with catering. I smiled and handed them a name tag. People expect power to come with noise, expensive shoes, a house with glass walls. I chose none of that. My house is small, tucked at the end of a quiet street with peeling mailbox numbers. My car doesn't purr, it works. I keep it serviced myself. Noel always assumed I used to manage someone else's trucking company, that I retired early when things got hard after his father died. I let him believe that. He never asked for more, and I never offered it. I didn't want him growing up in someone's shadow, especially not mine. He earned his degree on scholarships, took internships, worked nights. When he landed the job at Western Stream Logistics, he called me crying in the parking lot. Said he'd finally made it. I told him I was proud. I didn't tell him that Western Stream was one of my subsidiary holdings under Northwood Freight and Holdings. I didn't tell him I owned it. I've always kept my name off the executive records. Maria Stanton doesn't appear on any company's front page. I use trusts holding companies and people who know how to keep my privacy airtight. It isn't secrecy for ego, it's control. I built Northwood from scratch. From loading docks and breakdowns and nights spent in motel lobbies waiting for delayed trucks. I know every mile of its bloodline, but I never needed the world to clap for me. I just needed to make sure my son never bowed to the kind of people who thought suits made men. And now those very people had decided he wasn't enough. I opened my laptop. Her name was easy to find. Elaine Marchand. Regional Sales Consultant. Division B, Western Stream Logistics. I clicked the file open and started to read. Juliana didn't stop her mother. Not when the wine glass was raised. Not when the insult hung in the air like a sour mist. Not when Noel's face went pale. She just let the silence fill in the space where love was supposed to speak. I didn't say anything either. Not then. Not when I caught her eyes across the table and saw nothing. Not regret, not apology, not even discomfort. That night, while I folded Noel's jacket over the back of the dining chair, I heard their voices through the thin apartment walls. The bedroom door was cracked, the hallway dark. I hadn't meant to listen, but I didn't move away either. She's sweet, Juliana said. But we'll need someone with more presence for the wedding photos. There was a pause. The kind where someone considers saying the right thing and chooses not to. She doesn't really fit, not for the family album. Maybe we can do separate shots. My chest stayed still. I didn't inhale. I didn't blink. Presence. I've stood in frozen freight yards at 4 a.m, sat through union standoffs, warehouse audits, 3 rounds of hostile bids from competitors trying to rip my company out from under me. I've made deals over spilled coffee and iced over highways. I've fired men twice my size with a single sentence. But maybe that's not the kind of presence Juliana meant. Maybe she meant pearls and posture. Maybe she meant not looking like someone who brings her own thermos to a formal dinner. I went back to the guest room and turned off the light. Noel didn't know. He thought her silence was grace. He still believed people who say little have nothing to hide, but the truth had already begun to pull apart at the seams. A little here, a little there. And once you see the first thread loosen, it's only a matter of time before the fabric shifts. By morning, I'd requested the quarterly report for Western Stream Division B. Elaine's name was all over it. Elaine Marchand. That name. I'd seen it before years ago, buried in a report flagged for internal friction. At the time, she was just another mid-level sales consultant in a division that barely crossed my radar. Western Stream Logistics wasn't one of our core pillars, so I had delegated oversight to regional management. I only skimmed the personnel escalations, but I remembered the summary 2 HR complaints, one for favoritism, one for inappropriate remarks during a client event. Nothing severe enough for legal action. Then came the reimbursement irregularities expenses, filed twice, a missing invoice trail. That one led to a settlement. Quiet, costly, but contained. She stayed on. Most owners would have cleaned house. But I'd built Northwood to allow its divisions to run semi-autonomously. My philosophy was simple: if the numbers held, I didn't interfere. I trusted my structures, my processes, my people. But now Elaine Marchand had walked into my life at a dinner table and insulted my son like she was untouchable. So I opened the file again. I clicked through old records, the same smug signature on a half-dozen quarterly reviews. Her performance always just good enough. Her department sales region B sluggish but stable. The numbers had held, yes, but I hadn't looked closely in years. I started flagging expense patterns, vendor crossover, promotional travel budgets that didn't match deliverables. There it was again, that small, careful rot that spreads when no one's watching. She wasn't clever, just protected by the assumption that no one cared enough to dig. I scheduled a review. Not with her directly, not yet. I wanted departmental metrics, employee feedback. I wanted to see how deep her entitlement had grown and how many others she thought she stood above. She had no idea whose son she humiliated. No clue her job was 3 handshakes away from my own desk. That's the problem with people like Elaine. They believe power wears diamonds and announces itself with volume. They don't notice the quiet women taking notes from the corner until it's too late. And this time, I planned to speak from the center of the room. I scheduled the quarterly review under my own name. No assistant, no filter. Just a direct request to Division B's regional office with a list of key personnel to attend. Elaine's name was near the top. No one questioned it. They wouldn't dare. The meeting was set for Friday 9th or 0 a.m. in the downtown executive boardroom. I arrived at 8:40, took my seat at the head of the table, opened the folders, and waited. One by one, they filed in. Department heads, consultants, analysts. I nodded at each of them without much interest until I saw her. Elaine Marchand entered the room mid-conversation, laughing with the woman beside her. She didn't see me at first. Not until she reached the table and realized the person in the center wasn't who she expected. Her steps paused. Her eyes met mine. She blinked once. I watched her face shift, recognition blooming slowly like a stain through fabric. She wasn't sure yet, but she was starting to be. Ms. Marchand? I said, my voice even. Please sit. She obeyed, stiffly. Noel once told me I didn't have presence for photos. I smiled at the memory. He wasn't wrong. I never cared for flash. But in that moment, I understood what presence truly meant. It wasn't about lighting or angles. It was about who set the tone in the room without raising their voice. Who controlled the room before anyone else knew it needed controlling. I started with numbers. Departmental performance. Project drift. Budget excess. I asked questions no outsider should know to ask. Elaine kept glancing down at her notes, hoping for rescue. Then I slid the final folder toward her. Your personal expense trail, I said. Please walk me through the pattern from Q3 last year. A flush crept up her neck. I thought this was a general review. It is, I said calmly. You're one of our key contributors. I wanted to understand your methods. No one else spoke. The room belonged to me now, and as I watched her sit there cornered by her own trail, I realized I didn't need to raise my voice to make her remember me. I didn't fire her. That would have been too easy, too loud, and too generous. Instead, I requested a full internal audit, quietly, formally, and without explanation. Compliance received the order within the hour. By the end of the week, they were no longer asking what to look for. They were asking how far back they were allowed to go. The answer was simple, all the way. Elaine tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. She sent emails, attended calls, smiled too hard in meetings. But once the paper starts moving, it doesn't stop for anyone. Every receipt leaves a trail. Every favor leaves a footprint. And Elaine had been careless in the way people get when they believe no one is watching. Duplicated travel expenses. Vendor kickbacks disguised as consultation lunches. Inventory marked as lost that had quietly reappeared in partner warehouses tied to her personal contacts. Promotions handed to friends. Complaints buried instead of resolved. None of it was dramatic on its own. That's how these things survive. Small enough to ignore, large enough to accumulate. I read every summary myself, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to see her clearly. Not the woman who raised her glass at a dinner table. Not the voice that called my son a nobody, but the professional who believed entitlement was the same thing as authority. By Thursday afternoon, compliance had stopped using words like irregularities. They switched to exposure. Legal asked whether we preferred a quiet resignation or a formal process. HR asked if I wanted to be present for the conversation. I declined. This wasn't about spectacle. It was about alignment. I signed the final authorization and closed the folder. Elaine Marchand's file was no longer a question. It was a conclusion, waiting to be delivered by people whose job it was to make endings orderly. By the time I left the office that evening, the decision had already begun moving through the system, one email at a time. Elaine resigned on a Tuesday. No press release. No walk of shame. Just a formal email, time-stamped 9:17 a.m., addressed to regional leadership, citing personal reasons and a desire to explore new opportunities. The kind of language that sounds professional, but says nothing. Her files were sealed, her badge deactivated, her office emptied before lunch. It was over. I never saw her again. I didn't need to. Noel still didn't know. I hadn't told him about the audit, the meeting, or the quiet unraveling of Elaine Marchand's carefully padded career. He only knew Juliana had started pulling away. She criticized the way he dressed, suggested he apply for positions with more stature, asked if he planned to stay in his entry-level job forever. Her voice had changed, tighter, more clipped. Words that once felt like support now sounded like expectations. One night over dinner, she said it outright. Your mother's nice, Noel, but she doesn't really match the world we're building. He looked up slowly. Fork paused midair. I saw the exact moment the words landed. Something in him broke, not loudly, not visibly, just shifted. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply folded his napkin, placed it beside his plate, and stood. "She's the reason I can build anything at all," he said. That was the last thing he ever said to Juliana. He came home that night, not to a guest room, not for a visit, but to stay. He sat across from me at the kitchen table and asked if I wanted tea. We didn't talk about her. We didn't have to. The next morning, he was up before me, drafting something on his laptop, half business plan, half catharsis. I didn't ask what it was. I recognized the look in his eyes. The same look I'd had when I first put my name on a shipping license 2 decades ago. He didn't need my story anymore. He was beginning his own. Noel didn't cry. He didn't lock himself in his room or spiral into regret. He started waking up earlier, brewed stronger coffee, took long walks without headphones, the kind that let silence settle into the cracks. He cooked more too. Nothing fancy, just roasted vegetables, grilled chicken soup from scratch. Quiet dinners, easy talk. He started leaving his phone in the other room. One night, while we were rinsing plates side by side, he said it. "You're the only person who's never made me feel like I was less." I didn't look up. I just reached for the towel. "Because you never were," I said. He nodded. Said nothing more. He still didn't know. Not about Western Stream, not about the audits, not about the resignation. He didn't know I was the reason Elaine's chair sat empty now, or that the woman who once mocked his worth was now quietly cut out of the very network she leaned on for status. He didn't need to know yet. Sometimes silence protects more than truth does. And sometimes the right time to speak is after the soil has settled, when a seed has already begun to push through. Noel was rebuilding piece by piece. He started taking consulting calls on the side, helping smaller logistics firms with workflow analysis. I watched him sketch out models on scratch paper, annotate documents with real precision. His hands moved like someone who finally believed they were allowed to take up space. I kept my name out of it, not because I was afraid to tell him, but because he wasn't ready to hear it as a son. He needed to be ready as a man. And when that moment came, I didn't want it to feel like revelation. I wanted it to feel like recognition, because that was the only thing I ever wanted for him to see himself the way I always had. It wasn't long before someone else started to notice. Someone outside our little world of routines and shared dinners. She was young, mid-20s maybe, bright, direct, and just curious enough to be dangerous. Said she was researching women-owned logistics firms for a business feature and wanted to talk about Northwood Freight. "I think I've traced it back to you," she said gently, like she was offering me a secret I already owned. I raised an eyebrow. "That took you long enough." She grinned. "So you're confirming it, I'm not denying it." We met the next day in my garden. No conference rooms, no boardroom lighting, just folding chairs, black coffee, and the last of the summer flowers brushing against our legs. She asked thoughtful questions. How Northwood started. Why I stayed private. What success looks like when no one's clapping for you. I answered as much as I wanted to, no more. She asked for a photo. I gave her one, nothing styled. Just me by the rosemary bush holding a clipboard. She asked if I wanted to pose somewhere more impressive. I told her this was it. The article ran the following morning. Small corner of the business section, but it didn't stay small for long. Something about it caught fire. The woman behind the curtain, the empire no one saw coming. By noon, Noel's phone hadn't stopped buzzing. He came into the kitchen holding it like it had betrayed him. "Mom," he said slowly. "This is you." I didn't answer right away. Just slid his plate across the counter and poured his coffee. He sat down, still staring at the screen. still trying to reconcile the mother who packed his lunches with the one who built a freight empire. I finally looked up. "I told you," I said softly. "You were never less." He didn't speak, just reached across the table and covered my hand with his. He didn't need the rest of the story. Not yet. But something had shifted in his eyes, something firm, clear, awake. And when he left that afternoon for his meeting, he wasn't walking alone. It was nearly a year to the day when Noel brought someone new to dinner. She arrived with a homemade pie in trembling hands and apologized twice before even stepping inside. Her dress was simple, her laugh unsure but not performative. When she looked at Noel, it wasn't to see if he approved. It was to make sure he was at ease. She called me Miss Stanton at first. I told her Mireya was fine. She smiled and relaxed into it like someone who didn't expect the invitation, but was grateful for it all the same. We ate on the porch. Noel grilled. He'd gotten better still, oversalted everything, but didn't burn the chicken. She set the table without being asked, poured water into glasses before anyone noticed they were empty. But what stayed with me was this: she asked about my work. Not the company, not the article, not the "how did you hide it" questions. She asked how freight routes changed with seasonal weather, how fuel costs hit independent drivers, whether building regional centers near rail access points was worth the risk. She asked because she was interested, not impressed. After dinner, when Noel went inside to get dessert, I asked her quietly, "What do you see in my son?" She didn't hesitate. "Everything I'd want to build with," she said. "Not someone to fix. Not a man with potential. Just a foundation she trusted." I nodded once. That was enough. There was no toast this time. No wine glasses raised. No need to announce anything. Because love doesn't always arrive in a flourish. Sometimes it comes quietly, takes off its shoes, and asks how long the drive was. Later that evening, as they stood by the door ready to leave, she turned and said, "Thank you for raising him the way you did." I watched them walk down the path together, side by side, hands intertwined, not to hold each other up, but simply to hold. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like the silent one at the table. I felt like the root beneath it.